He was hurt. He played through it. And still they came for him. Shedeur Sanders had just finished a game sacrificing his body for the team, but in the press room the questions weren't about grit or performance. They were aimed at creating tension, division. What Sanders did next flipped the script. He didn't just respond, he dismantled. With every word he exposed the game beneath the game, a system more invested in narrative warfare than football. And instead of cracking under pressure, he stood taller than ever.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
This moment wasn't about defiance, it was about clarity. Sanders used that spotlight to reveal how systemic manipulation distorts the stories of players, especially young black quarterbacks. He stood for more than himself, he offered a framework for others to follow. With mental toughness, strategic calm, and a commitment to truth, Sanders turned a media ambush into a moment of transformation. His leadership didn't just lead his team, it lit the way for the next generation. The press conference had barely begun when the reporter leaned into her question, smiling just enough to mask the edge. She asked Shedeur Sanders whether the tension between him and the coaching staff was starting to hurt the team's performance. A loaded question if there ever was one. It wasn't just an inquiry, it was bait. Designed not to clarify but to twist. Sanders knew it. The room knew it. The air got tight. Instead of biting, Sanders paused. And then he dismantled the premise. Not with anger but with precision. He rejected the false dichotomy that the media thrives on, player versus coach, ego versus team. He said what needed to be said, that narratives like this weren't just wrong, they were dangerous. And more importantly, intentional. He didn't stop there. Sanders took it further, calling out the media's long-standing playbook, especially against young black quarterbacks. It wasn't just about him. It was about the system. He broke it down step by step. You get asked a manipulative question, your answer is chopped into a misleading headline, and suddenly the locker room starts to shift. Trust fractures. Confidence erodes. Then the headlines point back to those very cracks they helped create. And he called it exactly what it was, a strategy. One built to break careers before they even begin. He emphasized that he's not falling for it. Not now, not ever. He's watched it happen too many times. The setup is always the same. But this time the script got flipped. He credited his clarity to his father, Deion Sanders. The lessons weren't just about football, they were about the world that surrounds it. About staying grounded. About understanding your value even when others try to shrink it. Shedeur wasn't just defending himself, he was offering a masterclass in media literacy, wrapped in football vernacular. He talked about unity like it was sacred. That a team's chemistry is fragile, and when external forces come in to sabotage that through fake stories and skewed headlines, everyone loses. His refusal to speak negatively about his coaching staff wasn't diplomacy, it was resistance. And let's not overlook the backdrop. This wasn't just any press conference. Shedeur had been playing hurt, battling injuries while still showing up, making plays and leading. His physical state alone should have shifted the narrative to one of grit and resilience. But that's not how the game behind the game works. They didn't want to talk about his recovery or his leadership. They wanted division. He gave them none. Instead, he used the moment to speak life into the story, highlighting his team's collective commitment and his own responsibility as a leader. He dove into the intricacies of the game, not to flex but to show he knows what he's talking about. While dissecting defensive coverages and explaining in-game decisions, Sanders showed an IQ that made it impossible to dismiss him as just another young quarterback. He connected football mechanics to leadership philosophy, proving that his approach is both intellectual and personal. His tone wasn't combative. It was confident. And layered beneath every answer was a deeper refusal, to be reduced, to be manipulated, to be made a pawn in someone else's drama. He wasn't just defending himself, he was rewriting the way press conferences could be. He drew a line from experience to awareness. Having seen how other players before him were taken down, not by lack of skill but by media distortion, Sanders emphasized the importance of recognizing patterns early. Of understanding not just what's being asked but why. He said his job is to protect the team, not just on the field but off it too. That means calling out narratives that divide, and amplifying truths that unify. It's leadership redefined. Not loud. Not flashy. Just rooted in values and clarity. One reporter tried to pivot, asking if his reaction wasn't too harsh, if he was being too sensitive. Sanders didn't flinch. He responded by asking what part of protecting your peace and your people qualifies as too sensitive. He said if speaking truth is uncomfortable, maybe the problem isn't with the truth, it's with the system that avoids it. There was no tantrum. No meltdown. Just a young athlete refusing to play a tired media game. And the irony? The headlines the next day proved his point. They twisted his comments again, showing just how desperately the cycle needs to be broken. He spoke about mental health, not as a buzzword but as a battlefield. When narratives get twisted, the damage isn't just external. It seeps in. It messes with confidence, joy, identity. Sanders made it clear that protecting your mental space isn't weakness, it's survival. Especially when the very system you play in is structured to unravel you from the inside. And yet, he wasn't bitter. He was calm, focused. The way he talked about staying centered, about finding purpose even in chaos, wasn't performative. It was practiced. Like someone who's had to do this before and knows he'll have to do it again. There's a reason this moment hit harder than most. It wasn't just the words. It was the clarity. The full circle understanding that football is as much a mind game as it is physical. And that being media savvy is now part of the athlete's survival kit. Sanders wasn't trying to go viral. He was trying to stay sane. He said he's not interested in clicks. He's interested in truth. And while that might not sell as fast as fake beef or edited sound bites, it's what keeps the team together. What keeps him. If there's a lesson here, it's this. You can't play defense if you don't know the offense coming at you. The NFL media ecosystem has its own playbook, one that thrives on conflict and sensationalism. Shedeur knows the plays now, and he's calling them out in real time. For young athletes watching, this wasn't just a press conference, it was strategy. A blueprint. Proof that authenticity still has power even when the system's built to mute it. He didn't just reject the media's game, he exposed it. What made Shedeur's words hit even harder is that they didn't come from someone out of his depth. This isn't a guy barely hanging on in the league, lashing out for attention. This is a quarterback who studies defenses like he's reading a chessboard. Someone who understands not just how to win a drive, but how to lead a locker room under pressure. He's not fumbling his role, he's mastering it. And when the cameras roll, he doesn't just recite cliches. He analyzes situations like a coordinator. He's walking proof that poise and performance can coexist, and that intelligence on and off the field should be the standard, not the exception. Which makes the attempts to derail him through tired narratives even more ridiculous. He pointed out something most fans don't think about: how often the same media machine that hypes you up can just as quickly tear you down. One month you're the next great hope. The next, you're a distraction, a problem, a diva. It's not just a shift, it's a setup. A cycle. Sanders called that out directly, highlighting the real agenda behind the baited questions. He said the problem isn't a lack of talent, it's the refusal to let black quarterbacks exist outside of tired stereotypes. And when they don't conform, the media labels them arrogant or uncoachable. He's seen it happen too many times. And now that it's being aimed at him, he's not staying quiet. Even more striking? He wasn't defensive about it. There was no chip on the shoulder, no anger in the tone. Just calm, unshakable clarity. That's what set the moment apart. He laid out the reality without playing into their hands. And in doing so, he exposed the trap in real time, while dodging it. At one point, he asked why more people aren't questioning the way these media patterns repeat. Why it's so rare for anyone to pull back the curtain on how stories are crafted and weaponized. It wasn't a rhetorical question, it was a challenge. And in that room, there weren't many reporters eager to respond. He also brought it back to the importance of speaking life, not just to teammates but to narratives. Sanders said he's learned that if you don't take control of your story, someone else will write it for you, and they won't be kind. That's the part that stuck with people. Not the confrontation but the clarity of purpose. Every word he spoke came from a place of intention. He said he's not just trying to play ball, he's trying to leave something behind. Not for legacy's sake, but so the next crop of young players knows how to survive this system without losing themselves in the process. That kind of thinking doesn't show up on stat sheets. But it's leadership in its purest form. You could feel the shift happen while he was still talking. The press room got quieter, not just out of awkwardness but because it was rare to hear that level of insight without spin. He wasn't trying to sell anything. He was just telling the truth. And when that happens, the room changes. He even joked about it mid-conference, saying he knows exactly what parts they'll clip and post, and which parts they'll conveniently leave out. It was a moment of levity, but it also hit a nerve. Because he's right. The machinery behind the coverage is predictable. That's what makes it so dangerous. He shared that one of the things Deion always told him is that knowing your identity is your first defense. Not your brand, your identity. The part that doesn't shift with the opinions of strangers or the swing of the scoreboard. Shedeur said that's how he's been able to stay grounded even when the noise gets loud. It wasn't performative wisdom. It was lived. You don't talk like that unless you've had to walk through it. And with everything the media has tried to throw at him, both subtle and overt, it's clear this isn't his first time having to play defense in more ways than one. What the media didn't focus on, and what Sanders didn't bother to emphasize, is the fact that he's been playing hurt. Not just sore but legitimately banged up. The kind of injuries that sideline most players. And yet he showed up. Delivered. Took hits. Got back up. What? But that story doesn't trend as fast. It doesn't spark arguments or fan division. So it gets buried. Instead, the media tries to create drama where there is none. And Shedeur didn't just see it, he called it out. Which is why this moment mattered. It wasn't about an outburst. It was about drawing a line in the sand. He said that Deion's biggest lesson wasn't how to handle fame, it was how to handle people who twist your image for their benefit. That stuck. Because it's not just about one viral moment. It's about legacy. Shedeur made it clear that he's not just playing for wins, he's playing for something deeper. And that's what makes the system nervous. When a young quarterback understands both the playbook on the field and the one off of it, the old tricks stop working. The loaded questions lose their sting. The narratives lose their grip. Because you can't manipulate someone who knows the angles better than you do. He wrapped up by thanking the reporters for being there, but not before challenging them again. This time to do better. To ask better questions. To recognize when they're feeding into a cycle that destroys rather than informs. It wasn't hostile. It was honest. He said that as long as he has a platform he's going to use it, not to clap back but to build. And if that makes people uncomfortable, maybe they should ask why. That was the mic drop moment. Not flashy. Just unshakable truth delivered with full awareness of the ripple it would cause. The press conference ended quietly. No shouting. No chaos. Just a lingering silence that hung in the air because everyone knew something had shifted. Shedeur Sanders didn't just walk into a room full of reporters, he took control of the space, told the truth, and walked out without giving them the story they came for. And that, ironically, became the story. Not because it was explosive but because it was rare. A quarterback fully aware of the traps, refusing to step into them and daring others to follow his lead. It's not the kind of clip you watch once and forget. It's the kind that sticks with you, and not for the drama but for the... What kept echoing after that press conference wasn't just what Shedeur said, but what he refused to say. He didn't give them a soundbite they could weaponize. He didn't validate the premise of dysfunction. He didn't hint at frustration with coaches or teammates. That restraint wasn't accidental. It was calculated, and it showed a level of awareness most veterans don't develop until much later. He made it clear that he understands how fast confidence can be chipped away when narratives start stacking. One headline becomes a storyline. One storyline becomes a reputation. And once that reputation sticks, it follows you longer than any stat line ever will. Sanders wasn't speculating about this. He was describing something he's watched happen in real time across the league. On the field, that same awareness shows up in how he plays. He doesn't panic when a drive stalls. He doesn't rush throws just to quiet the noise. He reads coverage, adjusts protections, and takes what the defense gives him. That patience mirrors how he handles the media. He doesn't overreact. He doesn't chase approval. He plays the long game. And that's why the attempt to paint him as volatile or combative falls flat. His game tape doesn't match that narrative. His press conferences don't either. What you see instead is consistency, preparation, and a quarterback who understands that leadership isn't just about arm strength, it's about stability when everything around you is trying to pull you off center. Another reporter tried to soften the angle, asking if he felt misunderstood. Sanders didn't hesitate. He said misunderstanding only happens when people don't listen. And too often listening isn't the goal. Reaction is. He pointed out that questions aren't always asked to get answers, they're asked to provoke moments. That's when he said something that landed heavier than anything else. He explained that once you recognize the pattern, you stop taking it personally. You stop internalizing narratives that were never built on truth to begin with. That's not arrogance. That's self-preservation. And it's something he believes every young player needs to learn early, before the damage sets in. He talked about confidence not as bravado but as discipline. The discipline to trust your preparation. The discipline to stay quiet when reacting would be easier. And the discipline to speak up when silence would be more convenient for everyone else. Sanders made it clear that he's choosing the harder path because it's the honest one. He acknowledged that pushing back comes with consequences. That the same outlets he's calling out will continue to test him. But he said he'd rather deal with that than compromise his integrity or allow false narratives to fracture his team. That mindset doesn't come from entitlement. It comes from understanding exactly what's at stake. There was also the physical toll he briefly addressed, almost in passing. Playing through injury forces you to confront yourself in ways most fans never see. Every hit lingers longer. Every decision carries more weight. And yet, even while sidelined at times, Sanders emphasized staying engaged. Mentally locked in, supporting teammates, staying vocal when he couldn't be physical. That's another detail the media largely ignored. Because leadership from the sideline doesn't spark controversy. It doesn't generate clicks. But within the team it matters. And Sanders made it clear that his role doesn't pause just because his body needs time. That kind of commitment doesn't show up in box scores, but it defines locker rooms. He circled back to the idea of speaking life, explaining that words carry weight whether people admit it or not. When narratives are constantly negative, they seep into environments and start shaping expectations. Sanders said his responsibility is to counter that, not with blind optimism, but with honesty and accountability. He took responsibility for mistakes on the field without letting those mistakes be turned into character flaws. That distinction mattered. Owning performance doesn't mean accepting disrespect. And Sanders made it clear he's comfortable doing one without allowing the other. That balance is rare, especially under the microscope he's under. When he referenced Deion again, it wasn't to lean on his name, but to emphasize continuity. The lessons he talked about weren't glamorous. They were about consistency, preparation, and understanding environments before they understand you. He said being taught early how systems work saved him from learning the hard way later. That foundation shows in how he moves. There's no scrambling to explain himself. No backtracking. Just a steady refusal to be molded into something that benefits everyone except him. And that's what makes his stance resonate beyond football. It's not about defiance for attention, it's about boundaries. As the season continues, that approach shows up between the lines. You see it when he doesn't force throws to chase numbers. You see it when he trusts his reads even after a bad series. And you see it in how teammates respond to him, locked in, engaged, aligned. Those are the details that don't fit the narrative of dysfunction. And that's why they get overlooked. But Sanders knows that performance is the ultimate rebuttal. Not because it silences critics, but because it reinforces truth. And truth, as he's made clear, doesn't need embellishment. In the end, this wasn't about one reporter or one question. Sanders said that plainly. It was about drawing attention to a system that thrives on distortion and division. A system that benefits when players stay quiet and compliant. And his refusal to do either sent a message far beyond that room. He showed that you can be young, confident, and thoughtful without fitting into a box someone else built. That you can challenge narratives without becoming one. And that understanding the game off the field is just as important as mastering it on Sundays. In one of the final moments of that press conference, Shedeur didn't just talk about football or media narratives, he pivoted to something deeper. He said that when you're in the spotlight as a young quarterback, especially a black one, you have to understand that the system isn't built to protect you. It's built to test you. And that test doesn't end when the whistle blows. He talked about the emotional weight that comes with every question, every headline, every misquote. That players are expected to carry the expectations of a franchise, the responsibility of leadership, and the burden of perception all at once. And then still be gracious in post-game interviews when the questions are crafted like traps. That kind of pressure, he said, breaks people, unless they learn how to armor up mentally. He pointed out how there's a constant double standard. When certain quarterbacks speak with confidence, it's seen as poise. When he does, it's arrogance. When others push back on media narratives, it's labeled as leadership. When he does, it's hostility. And he asked, without flinching, why that keeps happening. The room went quiet. Because everyone knew the answer. They just weren't ready to say it out loud. But Shedeur was. He said he's not here to play the media game. He's here to play football. To lead. To represent something bigger than himself. And if that makes people uncomfortable, then maybe it's time to get uncomfortable. That clarity shows up when he's under center too. Watch any of his recent matchups, and you'll see a quarterback who isn't rattled by noise. He adjusts, audibles, manages the tempo. He's not just playing the game, he's studying it as it unfolds. That's not normal rookie behavior. That's a student of the game who's learned to think 5 steps ahead. Even when he's pressured, you rarely see panic. He steps into throws, takes hits and resets. That same mindset carried over to the podium. He handled that press room like it was a collapsing pocket, sidestepped the pressure and delivered something on target, straight to the heart of the issue. He said he's not trying to be perfect, he's trying to be present. That quote stood out, because it reflects someone who isn't performing for applause. He's not out here chasing headlines. He's building something real. A culture. A mindset. A team-first way of thinking that isn't built on reaction but on reflection. He said he doesn't want to be remembered for one press conference or one comeback game. He wants to be remembered for how he made people around him better. That's not something you say to sound mature. That's something you live out, and it was clear in how he carried himself. One of the most understated parts of his message was this: media has power, but it's not absolute. Athletes have platforms now. And Shedeur made it clear that he's going to use his, not to attack but to inform. Not to stir drama but to stop it before it starts. He reminded everyone that athletes are no longer just subjects in someone else's story. They're authors now. And he's going to keep telling the truth, even if it's inconvenient. Because if you don't tell your own story, someone will rewrite it for you. And that's not something he's willing to allow. He said something about protecting peace that resonated hard. That when you know who you are, you don't need validation from people who profit off your mistakes. That line lingered, because it cut through all the noise. It wasn't just about media, it was about identity, agency, and boundaries. He said he's been taught that peace doesn't come from applause. It comes from alignment. Knowing you stayed true to yourself even when people tried to pull you out of character. That kind of maturity doesn't just show up, it's built. And you could tell Shedeur's been building it brick by brick. When you look at his game film, that same focus shows up again and again. He makes mistakes, but they don't rattle him. He takes risks, but they're calculated. And when things break down, he adapts. That's the kind of quarterback who doesn't just manage games, he elevates them. The media wants a collapse, a feud, a viral moment. But what they got instead was a controlled burn, a slow, thoughtful takedown of the very system trying to provoke him. That's not just impressive. It's disruptive. Because it shows that young players don't have to play along. So where does this leave us? With a quarterback who refuses to be manipulated, a press corps that got a mirror held up to its tactics, and a moment that says more than any highlight reel. Shedeur Sanders didn't explode. He exposed. And in doing so, he gave young athletes a new model. Stay grounded, stay smart, and never hand your story to someone who doesn't value your truth. And if you want more breakdowns like this, more insight into what really goes down off the field, and more conversations that cut through the spin, you know what to do. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and share this with someone who needs to see it. We're just getting started.